Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. This is Omar Khalid and you're watching NEWSROOM. Today we dedicate our show to the Yaum-e-Taqaddus-e-Quran, the day of the sanctity of the Holy Quran. We all know why we are observing this day today across Pakistan from all sects of society, whether they be Muslims or non-Muslims, whether they belong to any sect or religion. They are all together and highlighting this act of the desecration of the Holy Quran as not only against all injunctions of any religion, but also against all injunctions of human rights and civilization. The day has dawned with the different processions across the country, whether it be Islamabad, whether it be all the different other local capitals, provincial capitals, where huge processions were taken out. People are asking for retribution. People are asking that the person behind this incident, the Iraqi national who had immigrated to Sweden, also be put behind bars and the proper investigation be held as to why he went and why did the authorities let him desecrate the Holy Quran. The pressure is such that the Justice Minister of Sweden has also said that he is going to look into such acts of desecration of the Holy Quran and might be looking at also such laws that could criminalize future desecration or burning of the Holy Quran or any other religious book. This is very important in this day and age when we see a clash of civilization, a clash of religions happening across the world, when we see Islamophobia being rampant not only in the East but also in the West. The ramifications of Islamophobia that it is having on societies, on people, on the minorities or majorities depending on the country that is Islamic or not. But the fact remains that 3 billion plus Muslims are affected by this. Why? Because directly or indirectly a fear has been instilled into all the non-Muslim communities that Islam is not a religion of peace. Islam is not a religion that propagates equality, wherein the fact, the reality is otherwise. The reality of the situation is that there are certain quarters that are hell-bent on creating this divide between Christians and Muslims, between other religions and the religion of Islam and the followers of Islam. And it is for this very reason that the prospect, the whole methodology behind interfaith harmony, it becomes extremely pertinent in this day and age. To discuss more on this, we have guests that will be deliberating upon different facets of this. But before that, we have a short package to discuss with you, to share with you rather. Let's look at it.
The rising tide of Islamophobic acts directly contradict international efforts seeking to spread the values of tolerance, moderation, and rejection of extremism. The recent desecration of Holy Quran in Sweden has coincided with the start of the Eid al-Adha and the end of the Hajj pilgrimage in Saudi Arabia, triggering widespread anger. An Iraqi immigrant in Sweden desecrated the Holy Quran outside a Stockholm mosque last week, causing outrage in Muslim world. Nation is observing Yaum-e-Taqaddus-e-Quran today to lodge protest against desecration of the Holy Quran in Sweden. There are nationwide protests in Pakistan to emphasize the relevant international organizations and states to legislate and criminalize desecration of symbols of religion, including holy books, personalities, places of worship, and followers. Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif has called upon the nation to record their protest against the desecration of Holy Quran. Prime Minister reiterated condemnation of such reprehensible acts that some extremists deliberately commit and urged relevant governments around the world to take effective measures to prevent its recurrence. The desecration of Quran or any other holy text is an offensive and disrespectful act and a clear provocation. Expressions of racism, xenophobia, and related intolerance have no place in civilized world. Islamophobia is undermining democratic order by hampering the necessary mutual respect for relations between peoples and states, so entire world should stand with Muslim world to foil these nefarious designs.
To discuss this in detail, we've been joined by different guests in the studio. We've been joined by Syed Ali. He's a strategic and foreign affairs analyst. Thank you very much, Ali, to have joined us. Ali, we were discussing just while the report was going on, and we will be highlighting all of this, but we'll also be joined, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, online by Dr. Jamil Ahmed Khan. He's a former ambassador, also a foreign affairs analyst. Jamil Saab, pleasure to have you on board as usual. And it's a very important topic, so your presence and your contribution will be paramount to it all. Let's begin with Ali. Ali, while the report was going on, we were discussing the whole background, the historical perspective of that. Would you like to highlight some of those important facts and figures as far as this whole, the background of it all is concerned?
Absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity, Omar. I think the reaction that you are witnessing at the state level, at the government level, at the diplomatic level, and also at the popular level is perfectly understandable and necessary to represent the true sentiments of the Muslim Ummah in general and Pakistani nation in particular about the most important document, the most important book around which the entire Muslim ideology and the faith is pivoted. So that is absolutely understandable. But I would like to say there's a method to the madness.
All right.
And it's not an isolated incident. And for our audience and viewers, it is very important to know that in the last 14 and a half hundred years, it is not something which is new. It is tragic. It invokes anger and disturbs us, but it is not something new or something recent.
But why does it keep on happening then?
Yes, that's the point. So when you come to even during the life of the Prophet, those of us who follow and read about that, even our last Holy Prophet had to face a lot of hate speech, if I may use a contemporary term, not just from his opponents but around the world. The issue is that the Muslim ideology, our book, the most sacred and the most revered personalities have faced hate speech throughout 1400 years.
But no,
but the context in which it needs to be understood is the modern media, social media, makes that hate speech come in contact and raises the awareness of the common people.
Of course.
Hence the popular response, the popular anger. Earlier these things, because before globalization, before the world became interconnected thanks
the
to
same things
this
were
technology,
happening, but we weren't
people
as
wouldn't know.
cognizant.
We didn't know. And there is another second aspect which is very important, Omar, and I'll briefly share with you. The Western civilization in the last 500 years underwent a fundamental transformation through the age of enlightenment and renaissance, which separated religion from politics. That renaissance, that separation of religion from statecraft and politics has not happened in any single Muslim country. And at the popular level, that is perhaps not even desirable. So when we expect the Western civilization to show respect to religion in the same way that we do, we need to understand religion is no longer as important and sacred to them.
I understand.
As it is to
I
us.
understand your point, and I'm going to throw this point to Jamil Ahmed Khan Sahab as well. Ambassador Sahab, when on the one hand, in many of the countries in the West, the religion is separate from the state, then, but despite that, why, when it comes to religions or holy books, is the Quran always the victim of such desecrations or such incidents? All right. Some technical issue with the ambassador, although he's there, but he can't hear us properly. Ali,
well, I'm there, Omar.
Okay, you're there. So let's go back to Ambassador. So, Ambassador, did you hear the question that I had asked you?
Yeah, I did. In fact, that's right. In fact, the Western country now is, although there are international laws prevalent and that is to be adhered, that is the advantage of globalization, that now the world has some framework where they can implement.
Yes, we can hear you, Ambassador Saab.
Right. So we have a framework, international framework, and that needs to be implemented and invoked by all the member states of the United Nations. Now, that's one aspect, and I'm going to dilate upon it a little more. But coming back on in the Western the countries, Sweden is quite now has become one of those top countries where it's repeatedly happening there. Now, why it's happening over there this time in particular, and last time in 22, once the similar desecration had taken place by another person, a right-wing person, and that was in May 22. Nothing happened to him because they were able to hide behind the freedom of assembly and freedom of speech. Now, if we dissect this freedom of speech and freedom of assembly, then there are very clear demarcation of it, and that has to be interpreted by the state, by the investigating getting agencies, and by the courts. Now, in this case, the courts had given permission, fine enough. And in your intro, you have already mentioned about the Justice Minister making commitment to look into it again. Now, it is to be looked into it from the point of view of international covenant, and not only international covenant, the United States, it has its own religious act of discrimination, religious discrimination, 1998. So, and the international covenant on this is basically the Article 7 of the Universal Declaration. Also, in a broad term, it does cover this aspect of it. And then the Covenant for the Civil and Political Rights, and discrimination and elimination of all forms of intolerance and discrimination based on religion. So we do have those instruments, the legal instruments, the legal international instruments. But the bigger question is that all those, we have heard condemnation from the United States. We have heard condemnations from the United Nations. We have heard condemnations from various countries, and more importantly, the OIC members and the statement of the Secretary General of the OIC. Could we do better than what it has been done to really make the Western countries, and particularly Sweden, realize that what they have done and they have violated in the broader term the international instrument, which they should not have? Now, the OIC is the biggest platform. They are the one to protect the sentiments and the interests of the Muslim Ummah. And that is what the Charter says. And the Charter preamble says that they would, the platform would protect all the interests of Muslim Ummah under the Charter of United Nations. This was formulated under Chapter 8 of United Nations Charter. It has the strength. The OIC has the strength of United Nations Charter. Now, having that such a powerful organization, and it's similar like other regional organizations, if they had passed a resolution under Article 9, which means an emergency or extraordinary session of the head of state, and if there was any reservation or difficulty in doing that, at least they could have invoked Article 8 of the Charter of OIC and could have called the Council of Foreign Ministers meeting, again an extraordinary session, and could have passed a resolution. What that resolution would have really made, what kind of a difference would it have made, depending what resolution would have passed. Now, the resolution could be straightway sent to the General Assembly, and General Assembly would have been convened on this issue. The resolution could also demand for the Security Council meeting, although it could have been vetoed. That's a different thing, but it would have been very difficult for those countries who would have thought of vetoing this very aspect of the intolerance, which is again an international instrument, intolerance and the hate speeches. So probably we are short of doing that. We have only issued, the OIC has only issued a statement and nothing more than that.
All right. I'll cut you here, and I'd like to take the same information there. I'd like to take the same information to Ali. Ali, why are only resolutions passed and not action taken? I'm not talking of Pakistan, because we are doing whatever we can. We've had a unanimous resolution that we passed yesterday. The Prime Minister had a very important speech, and I'll be discussing certain aspects that relate to strategic importance of this region and the difference between the East and the West. But this said, why is action not being taken against countries? Had it been any other country or any other situation, the results would have been completely different. Is there a certain leverage that countries in the West have when it comes to religious freedom, or whatever they do in the garb of religious freedom?
Absolutely. I think a very important question you raised, Omar. I think there are three aspects which need dispassionate and comprehensive understanding of the situation. First, as I earlier pointed out, what has happened recently is not an isolated incident.
But it's just that we've been made more aware because of social media.
Because of social media, because of electronic media, the Muslim world is more aware of the hatred that they are facing, and but they are not aware of the hatred that they have always faced. But
doesn't that need to change? You know, in this age when everything can be seen at the drop of a button, why can't governments take necessary action?
I'm coming to that, but let me briefly explain. There is a method to the madness. Number one, although there is a philosophical and geopolitical thesis which is called class of civilization, and there are several states which do not subscribe to that interpretation of international politics. However, you will agree that different value systems coexist on this planet. There are different civilizations which have different value systems, and by value systems I mean those nations and those civilizations value different symbols, personalities and texts differently. So although to build a shared world in which everybody is respected, everybody is tolerated, everybody is accommodated is a necessary diplomatic effort by all states, but it is not going to be immediately successful because different value systems view Umar different value systems as a threat, as a challenge, not at the popular level, but at a spiritual level, at an intellectual level, at a cultural level. So the response at the diplomatic level, at the legal level, at the political level, at the popular level, which we are witnessing today in the form of rallies, is necessary, but not sufficient.
All right.
So what is missing here are three things. The response should not be tactical and immediate. The response should be intellectual. The response should be cultural. The response should be social. Very quick three examples. I mean, if there is an intellectual challenge in the form of, let's say, allow me to use the name of the book, satanic verses. When there is an intellectual challenge, there is a recent book written by a scholar who questioned and challenged the very fundamental concept of sacrifice on the Eid al-Adha day. Since most people don't read these books, the challenge is multidimensional. It is at the popular level aimed at provoking the Muslims. So when they respond emotionally, that fits the bill and helps the critics of the Muslim world justify that by saying, see, Muslims are intolerant, they are extremists.
And that is what gives rise to Islamophobia, basically.
Absolutely. So they deliberately instigate such things in order to provoke a popular emotional response, in order to prove that the Muslims are emotional, they are extremists. See, they are not tolerant, they can't tolerate criticism. That's the popular level. But the intellectual challenge comes in the form of distortion of our values, our faith, and those books which require not emotional, not popular,
so there should
intellectual response.
So there should be a
multifaceted.
What you're trying to say is there needs to be a multifaceted response.
And there is a third aspect as well, which is benign, which is not popular, which does not invoke emotions the way, but is equally important. That is the cultural context. We, unfortunately, let me recognize, not as a Pakistani, most countries which recovered, which gained independence from the colonial Raj. There are almost more than 70 countries who decolonized and emerged, including Pakistan. They still need to recover. They need to be intellectually and culturally decolonize themselves. Be proud of their values. Be confident of their culture.
And come out of the shell of colonialism. This is what you're trying to say. All right, that's an important point. But we've also been joined by Usama Khawar Ghumman. He's an advocate, High Court. He joins us online. Usama, thank you very much to have joined us. Usama, this structural anti-Muslim racism since 9/11, before 9/11, in the form of books, for example, by Salman Rushdie, and then in the form of desecration of the Holy Quran, not once, not twice, but many a times, specifically in the European Union, specifically in countries such as Sweden. Do you feel laws and regulations that restrict the freedom of religious practice in the West need to be implemented in letter and spirit, or there needs to be an amendment in these laws in order for such incidents to not be repeated?
Thank you for giving me this opportunity. I think the question is not about the laws per se. Laws can exist, but they cannot be implemented very effectively if there is no political will and ownership by the society, by those governments, and most importantly, by the state machinery. So, in that sense, I don't think that would be very effective. What we will need to focus on, and as the other speakers were saying, and rightfully so, that since this is what is happening is response to something deeply structural, and that is historical, that is colonial history, lots of this animosity. So in that sense, and also economic. So I think we need to present in the short term, in the immediate term, which is an intellectual response, a response which is grounded in rationality, in modern language. So it has to be a rigorous intellectual claim that put forward Islam's case, or lots of Muslim sensitivity case. And that I don't think has not been done until now. And that's also partly responsible because we haven't produced, we haven't established let's say, amongst other things, an intellectual environment that fosters intellectual curiosity, this ability to present your case in a very, very rigorous, articulate manner.
All right, this ability to produce your case, let's take it from the United Nations Human Rights Council is meeting on the 11th of July on the request of Pakistan to discuss this issue on an urgent basis. What could be the outcome?
I think this is encouraging because previously our claim were very much taken.
We can't hear you properly, Usama. Your voice is distorted. Thank you very much, Usama. We'll get back to you again. Let's jump to Ambassador Jamil Ahmed Khan Saab. Jamil Saab, I was asking the same question. I'd like to understand the perspective of the United Nations Human Rights Council, other important organizations, the OIC. Our Prime Minister has spoken to the Secretary General OIC as well. And yesterday's speech to the joint session of the Parliament, in which our Prime Minister said that he is also going to request the United Nations Secretary General to have an urgent meeting of the heads of Muslim countries. How important is all of this in the context of what has happened in Sweden?
Well, in the diplomatic arena, this is a very significant move which Pakistan has already decided to. Now, what are those? Basically, the other panelists have also mentioned about the intellectual, how to counter it through the intellectual means and how to counter it through the cultural means. On the diplomatic side, there are only three ways to attempt to resolve these problems. Number one is the traditional diplomacy, where you try and convince intellectually to those countries, and you try and cite them the examples that how it really hurts the hearts of the people of the faith, the Muslim faith. And then if all the Muslim countries, if they follow this traditional diplomacy, write it to the respective ambassadors of their accreditation, and also to the Foreign Office of the Sweden or any other country for that matter, it will have one impact. In tandem, the other thing is this legal diplomacy, and through the legal diplomacy, as I said, there are international instruments, there are international covenants, there are international agreements, there are human rights the framework. So all combined together, one can move the resolution through a larger platform, and that is a platform like OIC, which has its embedded charter to cater for such things. The last thing, and again, it is counted in the intellectual effort. The last thing is the public diplomacy, where you issue the publication, where you arrange seminars, symposiums, and use the social media and the media, main media. And besides that, one has to also identify the weaknesses, what the Muslim Ummah as a whole, or the Muslim world as a whole has. The Harvard University alone has more publications than all the Arab world, Arab countries together. So we have to increase those efforts as well. So if we start doing all these in tandem, if we don't do it, what is going to happen is that the religion and the hate speeches are now being used as a tool by those political parties, right-wing political parties. There could be a variety of grounds they can or logic they can make, but that is in contradiction with the international framework of various laws. So from that standpoint, I think we have a lot. We have to make a plan and a long-term plan, and in short-term, what we have done, including what Pakistan has done. That's how the effort we can start making the efforts. And these efforts should be consistent.
What Pakistan has done in the short run, but I think what you said, and I agree with you, in the long run, we need to have a more multifaceted, multi-pronged approach as to how to deal with this in the long term, so that such incidents either reduce or do not happen again. Ali, coming to you, I'd like to refer to what Shehbaz Sharif Saab said yesterday in the joint session of the parliament. He said that events such as these are part of a conspiracy to create a rift between Christians and Muslims. But of course, in the larger context, there is a clash. We talked about clash of civilizations, that you said a lot of states do not adhere to, but there's also a clash of religion apart from those clash of civilization, and they are both more or less interspersed or interrelated one way or the other. This conspiracy or thought of a conspiracy to provoke Muslims through events such as these, or the whole Islamophobic mindset that a lot of people in the West have developed. How can we counter this through action? Let's forget resolutions for once and let's talk of actions. If you were put in the grand seat to drive something in the long term, what would you do?
Absolutely. I mean, very briefly, on a rational note, hatred is strategically very useful. If you do not promote hatred or tolerate it as a state policy in certain countries, how will you convince your people to go and fight and invade those countries? Can you convince people, your citizens, unless, if you respect someone, you love someone, and you value their lifestyle, how will you convince someone to go and invade that country, whether it is Iraq, whether it is Afghanistan, whether it is Lebanon?
So what you are trying to say is that
is strategically useful.
Yes, this
so
is what
let me say this candidly. Number one, so to expect this is useful normative discussion. That, and based on idealism, that everybody should respect everybody. I agree with that. That's the ideal we all work for, and our diplomats and our scholars or our anchors continue to remind the Western powers of their responsibility to respect and tolerate us, but they don't. Number one. So I explained the strategic utility of maintaining a degree of hatred which is strategically useful. However, now what we can do, like you mentioned, and I also mentioned in the earlier introduction, we need to do four things. The state needs to respond legally, diplomatically, and politically. It is doing that.
Exactly.
We must, the day that we are marking today reflects the true sentiments of our nation. And we have, at the diplomatic level, I think the world should also recognize that Pakistan has taken a leading role in galvanizing the support in Geneva at the OIC level and garnering this resolution, and also building a momentum that this is not an individual issue, it is a civilizational concern, number two. Number three, the popular rallies. I was coming to your studio and I met a number of rallies in Islamabad, in Rawalpindi, that allows the public to voice their concern, and that is also noticed internationally. So that is also important. However, this needs to be reinforced at three levels. First, intellectual level. If the challenge comes at the intellectual level, our scholars, not just religious ulama, but also scholars of history and philosophy and logic, they should come up with convincing arguments that what such individuals are doing is harmful for their own interest.
And maybe they should have international discussions with other scholars across the world.
Also coming to the legal aspect, which is very important. I think if you can describe an individual as a terrorist, according to United Nations Security Council resolution, if that individual has destroyed a building that is sanctioned as a UN recognized, UN sanctioned terrorist by the whole international community, why an individual who has heard the sentiments and beliefs of almost 2 billion people in the world are not sanctioned?
That's a very important point.
And lastly, I think at the cultural level, our media is very important. The content that we produce, not just in news and current affairs, but also in our entertainment, in our music, in our dramas, in our movies, we should proudly showcase the good, the strong, and the attractive aspects of our history and religion.
The soft image.
And a soft part of Islam is missing in the entertainment industry.
Exactly.
The entertainment content that we see is primarily, it seems, in the local cultural setting, influenced by the Western values, rather than showcasing internationally. If we can have electoral drama running on PTV for so long, why can't we make a drama on Tipu Sultan? Why can't we make a drama on Allama Iqbal?
There are things that are in the pipeline that we, of course, will be
that
seeing
is
very
very
soon.
important. So you need to showcase your soft power through your cultural content, through your intellectual discourse, and also allowing our students and our people to showcase their sentiment as well. But we should sanction such individuals at the legal and diplomatic level, that this is a threat to international peace and security.
And that is what I'm going to ask Jamil Sahab. Jamil Sahab, how can we sanction such individuals on a diplomatic level? Jamil Sahab, can you hear us? We can't hear you. Can you put the mic?
So I can hear you now. There is only one fundamental course available, and that is United Nations Charter. United Nations Charter gives and dilates upon all how legally you can sanction such people. It's the same way that the way they had passed the resolution of Security Council 1267, under which there are a list of sanctioned people, and that is being practiced all over the world. And those people cannot move. Their properties have been confiscated. They are declared as terrorists. Likewise, there has been international law. There is still the international law about the Holocaust. Now, about such sanctions, we have to, as I was saying, that in en bloc or otherwise, we have to do that multifaceted, as you were mentioning, multi-layered and multi-dimensional diplomacy. And there are only three major courts available in the diplomacy, as I said, which is the legal, traditional, and the public diplomacy. So around this revolves around our discussion, what we were making, how to really propel that. So what is needed here is a consistency in the international political arena, international politics, and from there we draw the diplomacy, and diplomacy is subset of the politics, basically. So that effort should be consistent, and that consistency really can break through that. And through that consistency, we can move a resolution under Chapter 6. And if no one listened to it through those sanctions, then even Chapter 7 can be invoked. The only impediment in that, Chapter 7 of the United Nations Charter, the impediment on that is that there are countries, they might as well veto such resolutions, and but at least that would make a point. And once those countries who try and veto it, I'm just assuming, veto it, they can be convinced, they can be intellectually engaged, they can be engaged through those three means which I just mentioned by the entire world, those who are the proponent of the pluralism and those who believe in interfaith harmony. There are most of the countries do that, so it's just matter of tapping those um, uh, feelings of respective countries, whether they are the Muslim countries or non-Muslim countries. But here the question is, if the right-wing political parties in Western countries, if they start using Holy Quran or the religion as a tool to propel and peddle their cause of the politics, then it becomes very difficult for those countries also, because then they muster the support on the basis of hate, you know. And unfortunately, after a long time, even the United States witnessed that during Trump era, that how a constituency was being built by restricting Muslim countries to enter. 5 Muslim countries were named initially by the Trump regime at that time. So at that time also, the Muslim country did not really make as much of, or did not raise as much of voice as it should have been. Coming back to the Holy Quran desecration, I think the Muslim countries would have that much of realization now, all the members of OIC country, that they would invoke their own charter. And that charter, I have already mentioned the clauses of or the articles of those charter. And once they invoke those charters, they can impose sanction on Sweden, as a matter of fact, bilateral sanction and the multilateral sanction of the entire OIC members. They can do that. Very conveniently, they can do that. The only danger is that if OIC does that, then European Union might as well respond to it, reciprocate it by imposing sanction. And perhaps that's the reason they're not doing that. But at least they can follow the legal framework and they can follow the legal course of action and invoke that. Once they start invoking it, they will have the respective countries would have the pressure. As I was saying, May 22, if we were able to address that problem at that time, perhaps the second repetition would not have taken place right in front of the main mosque of Stockholm, and right behind the ranks and files deployed, police ranks and files deployed, behind them, the guy, in such an abrupt manner with a haymaker in his hand and start desecrating the Holy Quran.
I understand that, Jamil Sahab. I also understand the legality of it all. I understand the conventions that are present there. But you know, the whole need is to apply those conventions in principle. And I also understand that some countries might be vetoing it, and then we'll need to convince those countries. But in the longer run, we see a lot of issues that have cropped up between civilizations, between religions, between countries, between the East and the West, between the global North and the global South, and religion somehow has crept into one of the main factors behind it. Ali, I'm going to come to you now. Where have the religions gone wrong? Why do people in countries such as Sweden or other countries have to resort to burning the Holy Quran and not the Torah, not the Bible? Why is Quran the victim?
I think unfortunately the history has been unfair. The study of history reveals that it has been always unfair. It is always a struggle between right and the powerful, unfortunately, and that has been the cardinal principle of history. And when you, I was reading recently, for example, there is a certain faith which we as practicing Muslims respect. We respect all faiths. We and it's part of our constitution as well to give respect to all religions. There is a particular faith which has very, I think, astutely sort of politicized their grievance based on what happened in the Second World War to a particular faith. Okay, and that is considered a blasphemy even to mention that term.
Anti-Semitism, the whole concept of
in the
anti-Semitism.
Western civilization. Very interestingly, for 500 years, the entire African continent was exploited physically, materially, ideologically like none other. Why is that not a concern? So if the exploitation, killing, humiliation, why what is happening in Kashmir is not an
What is happening in Palestine
okay.
is not.
And it is happening on a daily basis. What is happening in Kashmir? Is it any different from what the Jews faced in Second World War? They faced it for a particular time, let me remind you, under a particular regime. So consider the scale of that. 8 million Muslims are suffering on a daily basis. They are being blinded. They are being, the ladies are being raped, and they are being killed. That is happening for the last 75 years. And the international conscience and the international law and diplomacy, what are they doing about it? So we are living in an unfair world. So what I am saying is, we need to have a realistic approach and a comprehensive approach. I agree with Ambassador Saab. We need to do whatever we can at the diplomatic level. We need to do whatever we can at the political level. We need to do whatever we can at the popular level. But we need to reinforce it by an intellectual, cultural, and social effort,
and
in
discourse.
which our content is, it's not just what happened in Sweden. I mentioned, books like
I know. The Satanic Verses.
Satanic Verses. Because no common people don't read these books, so they are not provoked. But if you read it, maybe you will be more provoked. But it is not at the popular level. So the threat does not become less, but if it is not at the popular level.
Existential. The threat is
Exactly.
there, and that needs to be counted at all the different levels, including, you said, at the culture.
And also our scholars need to lead this effort. It's not the political and diplomatic are the very important instruments at the highest level, but it has to have that it needs to have that intellectual convincing power. Our scholars need to come up with books and scholarship which does not provoke or anger the West, which attracts the West, which impresses the West, which helps the West recover from its hatred towards the Muslim civilization, which convinces that, like Khutbah Allahabad of 1930, the Muslim civilization and the Muslim ideology offers peace, prosperity, peaceful coexistence, and progress for the entire world. It is not a zero-sum game that one civilization should be powerful and rich and its value system should be respected, while the other South should have poor people and exploited manpower and material resources, and their value system is any less respectable. So it is important that the South, the Muslim world should come forward. They should defend themselves socially, politically, legally, and diplomatically, but the onus is on our scholars to lead this struggle to convince the Western civilization that Muslim civilization is not a threat. It is something which needs to be and deserves to be respected.
Respect, I think, it becomes the key word here, and it is being used and misused to further, aggravate the Muslim population across the world. Ambassador Saab, my last question to you, and I'd like a very short answer to that. What should now be looked upon as a reaction from the West? What are you, as an ambassador, as a former ambassador, looking at from the West? Should we have solid, positive, optimistic expectations, or is it going to be a long struggle ahead to convince the West that they need to come up with solutions rather than existential problems?
It's a long effort, and it's long effort through the awareness, through all the tools which we have just discussed during your program, because there's no shortcut to this. And since they have their own legal framework, their constitutions, respective constitutions, they have to harmonize it in view of the international legal instruments. Most of the countries have not harmonized under the garb. Pope Benedict was very clear in that, and he has very clearly spelled out that freedom of assembly and freedom of speech does not mean that one start antagonizing the other people of faith and people the followers of the Holy Book. So likewise, we have to cover this statement of the Pope Benedict. There are legal instruments that has to be incorporated into those respects, and that's only possible if those respective countries they are made to realize that how detrimental it is in their own interest, in view of their image, in view of their their ratification of various international agreements and instruments, that they are not following these very fundamental human right violation, because it falls under the human right violation. And as I had quoted earlier, that it falls under the Article 7 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So we have to really invoke, and we have to propel, we have to really propagate through all these mechanisms what we have discussed. And the entire Muslim countries, particularly those who are loaded with the petrodollars, they should really take the lead. And Pakistan, in its own humble capacity, is making its own effort, and it has to be.
And I think Pakistan needs to be lauded. The current government needs to be lauded for all the efforts that it is making on the national and international levels to highlight this very issue. Thank you very much, Ambassador Jamil Ahmed Khan Saab, to have joined us, and Syed Muhammad Ali in the studios to have joined us. It was a very interesting discussion, and I would say or intellectual discussion as well. And I think we went beyond the normal discourse of what needs to be done and how we need to move forward. It's a very long battle ahead. It's a long struggle, but the results are going to be very fruitful if all the multi-pronged strategies are applied at the same time at the different levels. Ladies and gentlemen, today was an important day, that is Yaum-e-Taqaddus-e-Quran. The sanctity of our holy books is extremely important in this day and age, and for the billions of Muslims across the world. This is something that also needs to be realized by the global north and those countries in the west, that of course where religion is separate from the state, but all the basic principles of humanity are enshrined in all the holy books, including our Holy Quran. That needs to be observed as well. I think at the end of the day, it is the human spirit, it is the human rights that need to prevail, whether it be in the north or in the south. And all those who are culpable of issues or events such as that has happened in Sweden need to be brought to book. I hope the West is listening, and I hope that all of this will happen in the days to come. Allah Hafiz.